Welcome to the Economist Corporate Network's webcast series, sponsored by Oracle. My name is Vanessa Barchfield. I'm the editor of the Corporate Network in Central and Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. The healthcare industry was one of the most resilient sectors during the turbulence of 2009. I spoke with Anna Nichols, the EIU's managing editor for healthcare, about her expectations for the industry in the coming years. We chatted about the impact that U.S. healthcare reform will have on the industry, domestically and globally.
Well, for the US healthcare industry, it's a really seismic change because it basically brings in the kind of risk pooling that Europe has lived with for quite a while. So in return for not being able to turn down coverage for people with pre-existing conditions, insurers will get a new pool of young, healthy adults who now have to get insurance, whereas before they may not have bothered. So that's 32 million people who are now going to be covered, who weren't covered by insurance before. For the healthcare industry, it's therefore a huge change. For the world in general, this is quite an important business because the US accounts for 40% of the world healthcare market.
How much will healthcare spending be cut globally as a result of the financial crisis?
It's actually a longer term implication rather than necessarily a short term implication over the last year. In fact, we see healthcare spending continue to rise worldwide, but as a percentage of GDP, as a percentage of global GDP, it will gradually fall. And that's basically because although it's rising quite rapidly in developing markets, and indeed in the US, it's likely to continue to rise, in Europe in particular, it's going to have to start scaling back because of the problems with government budgets. For example, in Ireland, there's now talk of laying off 6,000 healthcare workers. And this is all happening despite the fact that these governments say that healthcare spending is ring-fenced, that it's protected compared to other sectors. There is just such a constraint on government budgets.
Do you see any opportunity for greater private sector involvement as governments cut healthcare spending?
Well, that's certainly happening in Eastern Europe. In Bulgaria at the moment, there is a big constraint on the healthcare funding, which has long been in deficit, and the problems are getting worse. And as a result, the government is now being pushed to break down the monopoly of the healthcare fund and allow people to take out top-up private insurance. And I should think that that is probably going to happen, especially in poorer markets, that because of the rationing that will inevitably come in some healthcare funds, that people will want to take out private insurance in order to cover themselves for additional care.
And looking again at Central and Eastern Europe, our region, a lot of our clients are concerned about changing demographics in the region. How will aging populations change the healthcare industry in sort of the medium term?
Well, aging populations are quite a big concern, particularly in Central Europe, so Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Poland, where the population aging, although it's not as extreme as somewhere like Japan, is a definite noticeable trend. In places like Russia and Ukraine, although it's happening at a slower rate. But there, the effects are actually exacerbated by the fact that the population itself is shrinking. So you've got fewer younger people paying into the fund and more older people who need treatment and who are effectively taking funds out of healthcare funds. And that is going to be a big issue.
Is Eastern Europe keeping pace with the rest of the world in terms of medical technology?
The thing that Eastern Europe has on its side is that it has a very well-trained, a history of well-trained healthcare professionals, and combined with the internet, that means that access to knowledge is strong. And private healthcare providers, private healthcare funds in particular, have been quite keen to buy up this state-of-the-art equipment in order to differentiate themselves from other hospitals in the region. That's one reason why the region runs a huge healthcare deficit in terms of trade, because it buys in such a lot of sophisticated equipment. Obviously, as the spending crisis hits home, that's going to be more and more difficult to sustain. And the problem is that there's huge inequality in access to this technology, in that you have it in some hospitals, and in some hospitals, you may not even have basic equipment. And that's going to have to be tackled over the next decades.
And what are two of the major global healthcare challenges you expect over the next decade or two?
Well, the main challenge is going to be cost containment, because worldwide populations are ageing, and the rollout of new treatments, particularly cures for cancers, certain types of cancers in certain people, means that there's just huge demand for healthcare treatments. It probably means that in most markets there is going to have to be some kind of health technology assessment, which means that they're going to have to try and work out which drugs are worth giving in terms of the quality of the extra life they provide. In Bulgaria, for example, they're having to actually make people pay for drugs for things like high blood pressure, because those kind of chronic illnesses use up an enormous amount of budget, and yet they are, in theory, affordable by most of the patients. That's the kind of tough decision that's going to have to be made.
Well, Anna, I think that's it today. Thank you so much for joining us.